So hello, everyone. Here we are at the last talk of this Original Love 4 retreat in late November 2020. Quite a time to be alive. Quite a time to practice. A gift, as we've been discovering anew. All are blessed. 10,000 times blessed. There's no obfuscation in that. Nothing outside it. As Henry said a couple of days ago, this practice begins with suffering and it ends with suffering. The root goes down deep to Shakyamuni Buddha, who ventured outside the protective confines of his palatial home and encountered illness, old age, and death. He also saw a sage, a devoted seeker, and his heart was sundered. Now it's our turn, right here in the midst. Back in May, after the on-screen, unrestrained killing of George Floyd and the liberation protests, including Black Lives Matter, I went looking for African American teachers in the Zen tradition. Teachers born of systemic oppression, teachers in this way of awakening. A quick search brought up Angel Kyodo Williams, writer, activist, and ordained Soto Zen priest. She's published a couple of books, lots of teaching to be found. Here's just an excerpt called Healing Situated in Love. If we are to speak of healing, she writes, we must first speak of trauma, the subtle and gross experiences that make it difficult to feel safe and experience well-being and balance. Trauma perpetuates terror, despair, hopelessness, and disconnection. It is a voyage that never docks at any port. Sometimes we distrust healing because it means that we have to imagine a different way of being in the world beyond our anger, woundedness, or despair. We may believe that to move beyond these hurts means that we can no longer be attuned to the suffering of communities and people struggling for justice, equality, or basic visibility. Or we may feel that healing means forgetting that we have been hurt and oppressed, or forgetting that there is an oppressor who should and must be held accountable for their violence. Maybe we believe that the right to healing is only for those who have been hurt and oppressed, and we're upset to consider that the one who hurts and oppresses is in just as much need of healing. Opening our hearts to woundedness helps us understand that everyone around us carries the same sense of woundedness. As we are mourning, we are remembering the commitment engendered by our bodhisattva vow, not just to achieve enlightenment and free all beings, but to hold space for the pain of beings in our practice as we hold our own. When we are able to show up to our own suffering, we are also able to show up to the suffering of others. This is how we begin the courageous and great work of loving ourselves and extending that same love to as many people as we can. Healing is situated in love. Love and justice are not two. That's Kyoto Williams. Not two. The night before this retreat began, I met with a student who had just finished reading Street Zen, a biography of the first openly gay Soto Zen master, Isan Tommy Dorsey. Here's a brief bio. I think it's worth hearing. Born in 1933, Isan Tommy Dorsey grew up on the West Coast, dropped out of college, and joined the Navy. During the Korean War, he was discharged for homosexuality. Back home, after trying a few straight jobs, Dorsey eventually found work in a nightclub as a waiter, a host, and finally as a performer in the drag review. He spent years running the streets as a drug-addicted alcoholic female impersonator and prostitute. Back in San Francisco in the 60s, Dorsey received his first instruction in meditation from Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. After that encounter, Dorsey practiced with such steadiness that his teacher named him One Mountain, Isan. 2 decades later, Dorsey became a Zen master, serving as abbot of One Mountain Temple, which is also known as the Hartford Street Zen Center in San Francisco. Living in the midst of an epidemic, he began to bring homeless people with AIDS into the temple to care for them. This eventually blossomed into Maitri Hospice, which was housed in the building next door to the temple. Isan himself died from AIDS in 1990. The student who shared this with me told the story in a nutshell. From a life of addiction, homelessness, prostitution, being gay in a world that denies your humanity, to finding Zen, pursuing practice, becoming a teacher and a caregiver. What amazed her, the point she wanted to make, was that Dorsey, Isan, was the same person throughout. There were not two. As she put it, he was fox and monk from the day he was born until the day he died. He never pushed any part of it away. It was inspiring to see how much he was himself throughout his life. Morinaga describes awakening as true self-confidence, true self, liberated, liberative, resting in this one empty, infinite, indivisible world, coming home and knowing for yourself who you truly are, finding what is there from the start, discovering, then offering, giving it all away. To be yourself throughout your life. You could say that's the question, the opening, the invitation we're exploring in this retreat. The bodhisattva Vimalakirti, deeply awakened layperson and contemporary of the Buddha, put it this way: what is the gate to the one and only? The one and only. Non-duality. Awakening to an awake world. This is about you. This form of the question comes from a koan, an atomic kernel of the Vimalakirtis Sutra. So today, Henry and I are going to offer a sort of duo looking into it. I'll begin setting the scene and then pass it on to Henry. So this is Hekigan Roku 84, Blue Cliff Record 84. And the case also appears with one small difference in the Shoyoroku, the Book of Equanimity, as case 48. I'm going to read the Hekigan version and just include this instruction from Master Engo that comes at the top, just to sort of whet our appetites and open up the space. Engo writes, although you say it is, there is nothing which it is can affirm. Although you say it is not, there is nothing which it is not can negate. Yes and no are already gone. Gain and loss have both been forgotten. It is completely exposed and naked. Just tell me, says Engo, what is in front of you and in back of you? A patch-robed monk appears and says, in front is the Buddha hall and the main gate. Behind is the sleeping hall and the master's cottage. But tell me, asks Engo, does this person have an eye or not? If you can convince me, I will allow that you are on intimate terms with the ancients. And here they are, the case. Vimalakirti asked Manjusri, what is the bodhisattva's entering the Dharma gate of non-duality? Manjusri said, in my opinion, in all things, not to speak, not to explain, not to show, and not to perceive. To go beyond all questioning or answering. This is entering the Dharma gate of non-duality, the Dharma gate of not to. At this point, Manjusri asked Vimalakirti, this is in the case, each of us has finished speaking. Now it is your turn to speak. What is the bodhisattva's entering the Dharma gate of non-duality? The Hekigan version ends with Secho, a comment. Secho said, what did Vimalakirti say? He also said, I have seen through him. The Shoyoroku version omits that and just ends with this line. Vimalakirti remained silent. So the Vimalakirtis Sutra, it's thought to date back to the time of the Buddha, was first written down, it appears, in the 1st century CE. It sets the stage that leads up to this ultimate exchange in this koan. It's probably a familiar story for many of you. The Buddha hears that Vimalakirti is sick and asks these, the sort of crowd of bodhisattvas attending him, to make a visit. But no one wants to go because they know Vimalakirti will draw them into Dharma discourse and no one can match his wisdom. They've been there, done that. So finally, Buddha keeps pressing, and Manjushri, bodhisattva of wisdom, agrees to go. It's Manjushri. And then all of them want to accompany him to witness the exchange. You know, this sort of archetypal bodhisattva of wisdom and the human bodhisattva of great compassion. So, as the sutra tells it, 32,000 bodhisattvas join in the visit. Vimalakirti's room is small, the room where he is ill, 10 by 10. The custom still for a traditional Doksan room. He somehow knows the many guests are coming and has his house cleared of all furniture. What, you know. The entourage arrives and they all enter his room, 10 by 10. They all fit. This is a cue about the spaciousness of the welcome. Joan Sutherland has this really lovely little commentary called Vimalakirti and the Awakened Heart. She has this comment: each of us in our ordinary householder's life is that room with all its beauty, richness, despair, difficult, tragedy, and triumph going on inside. So on into the sutra, Manjushri asks after Vimalakirti's health. And Vima, or Vimalakirti, responds from the heart, speaking to the heart of the matter. I am sick because the whole world is sick. If everyone's illness were healed, mine would be too. Why? Because bodhisattvas come into this world of birth and death for the sake of all beings. And part of being in this world of birth and death is getting sick. When everyone is liberated from illness, I will be too. Manjushri goes on to ask, householder, Vimalakirti, how should a bodhisattva console another bodhisattva who is sick? And Vimalakirti replies with a litany of teaching on how to console. First, remind that bodhisattva that the body is impermanent, but don't suggest that as a result, you should repudiate the body. In other words, be with it, allow it. Impermanence is also a gateway to transformation. Next, remind them that the body suffers, but don't suggest that as a result, you should strive for nirvana. This suffering isn't something to transcend, rather to be with in open-hearted compassion, to let it break our hearts all the way open. Remind them that the body is without self, but suggests that you should help others anyway. Giving, receiving, no one doing anything, yet plunged into serving, everything serving everything. Remind them that the body is serene in its emptiness, but don't teach that it is ultimately extinguished. Gone from the start. But that goneness is perfectly, fully, serenely expressed in things just as they are. There is no other emptiness than this. Such an array. Explain that you should regret your former transgressions, but don't consign them to the past. Use your own illness as empathy with the illness of others. This is about the suffering of the whole world and the bodhisattva work for the welfare of all beings. Don't dismiss your wounds. Offer them. Let them be portals. Such freedom. Finally, a bodhisattva seeking to console a bodhisattva who is ill should encourage her not to be distressed, but to manifest the roots of virtue, to maintain original purity of heart and lack of craving, and thus always to offer oneself as a healer who can cure all sicknesses. Thus should a bodhisattva console a sick bodhisattva in such a way as to make her happy. This reminds me of an E.B. White quote from the Jack Kornfield book that Henry referenced. White wrote, "Every morning I awaken, torn between the desire to save the world and the inclination to savor it." For Manjushri and Vimalakirti, these are not two. To save, to savor. What is the bodhisattva's entering the Dharma gate of non-duality? Before Vimalakirti puts this question to Manjushri, the retinue of bodhisattvas who are filling the room are first asked to present their view. How does a bodhisattva go about entering the gate of not two? So one by one, they come forward and speak using duality to try to overturn duality. Birth and death, darkness and light, self and other, self and no self, grasping and rejecting, perception and non-perception, defilement and purity, true and false, form and formless, good and bad, blame and blessing, bondage and liberation, mind and thoughts, eye and objects it observes, ear and sounds, nose and smells, wisdom and ignorance, real and unreal, exhaustible and inexhaustible, enlightenment and ignorance. The list goes on. So much duality, so many ways of sifting and sorting. When all have spoken, Manjushri, wielder of that sharpest sword, the sword that cuts into one, he's asked his view. In a room now filled with the array of forms spilled out and so many answers, what step will the bright, empty clarity of wisdom take? how will you enter the gate of not to? Manjushri says, in my opinion, in all things, not to speak, not to explain, not to show, and not to perceive, to go beyond all questioning or answering. This is entering the Dharma gate of non-duality. Manjushri is wielding his sword, cutting through everything that's been said. At the same time, he's using words to speak about transcending words, language to point to the ineffable reality that language fails to reach. Wisdom alone can't enter the gate. It has to be coupled with compassion. Not even coupled like one of Dogen's compound words, not even room for a hyphen. Wisdom compassion. Or as the Kanzeon Sutra calls it, just compassion. So it's past time to pass this on to Henry, but I just want to make a very quick return to Engo's instruction. Very brief. Again, this is Engo. Although you say it is, there is nothing which it is can affirm. Although you say it is not, there is nothing which it is not can negate. Yes and no are already gone. Gain and loss have both been forgotten. It is completely exposed and naked. This is you, already gone, utterly whole. Wisdom, compassion, your entire body. Just tell me, asks Engo, what is in front of you and in back of you? We might say a computer screen and a wall, or a pandemic and an election met with chaos, or hearts breaking for this broken world, and unspeakable gratitude for this practice. A patch-robed monk appears and says, in front is the Buddha hall and the main gate. Behind is the sleeping hall and the master's cottage. Just so. Unman called it your own bright light. See it, shine it, and you are on intimate terms with the ancients. Henry.
the question is, what is it to enter the gate of not to? Let's listen to Vimalakirti's answer, which is said to have roared like thunder. Well, it goes on and on, never stops. Thank you, Valerie. Wow. Thank you, Vimalakirti. Thank you, thank you. It never stops. Never stops. Here's a little reminder of that. We had some things come up in Q&As and things on this retreat about, is it this? Is it this? Is it, I got it. It's this, Limitless. Limitless. We could say, the word, this phrase, gate of non-duality, enter the gate of non-duality, almost like could mean entering the gate and finding it, sort of go through the gate, find it. One possible way of taking it. But another is that non-dual itself is a gate. And what does it lead to? So that's where we'll end this series, actually, of 4 retreats. Just a beginning, barely even crossing the threshold of a gate. 4 retreats, all on one theme, original love, origin in the sense of not so much getting back to something, but coming from a source. What does it all lead to? Okay, thank you very much.